Okay. I I let the madness begin, but I'm going to make everyone sit back down. We're going to go ahead and get restarted here. If I can have everyone take their seats. Huh? I know. It's almost better without the microphone and be like. All right. So I think people have had a chance to refresh their coffee, run to use the restroom, chat with neighbors. Excellent. Please stay, feel free to network afterwards. These are really great avenues, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Climate Collaborative is, but that's a big function of what we do is really try and bring people together to help facilitate climate change planning. So let me see if I can pull up. Okay. My name tag's falling off, of course, but well, thank you so much for all coming today. My name's Laura Ingeman. I'm the manager of the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative. I think I know a good portion of the people in the room, but there are a few unknown faces, so I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about what I do and why I'm here. So the Climate Collaborative, let me just get started here. Let's see if I can figure this out. All right. So we're a network for public agencies, and we have a number of different other partners in here, but really we're all about facilitating climate change planning. And what that means is really what I call the sort of building the support system, the framework behind the scenes that helps our leaders and our staff at our public agencies really try and digest things like this science, figure out how they actually do climate planning, help bring resources together, have conversations across city boundaries. So there's a number of activities that we're undertaking. We currently have 24 members in the Climate Collaborative, 10 cities, so over half of the cities in the county, 5 regional entities, 3 universities, and several nonprofits that directly support the public agencies in their climate change efforts, and as well as like San Diego Foundation is a core partner of ours, as well as SDG&E. So we really started off with doing climate action planning, learning to figure out how to measure greenhouse gas emissions and what types of measures the cities could take to reduce those, including energy efficiency and transportation. And then from there, a bunch of our city staff started to think about sea level rise and actually adapting to climate impacts, knowing that those were also going to be happening while we're attempting to reduce our emissions. And they were having these conversations amongst themselves as staff and really realized that there was so much value in getting together and talking about it across with other peer agencies, because as we all know, the field is constantly evolving and changing. It's really tough to keep up with. We're talking about this sea level rise science today. It's complex. It's great to sit down with your community members, with your partners on the ground, and really try and digest the information and figure out, okay, well, who's already taken some steps that I might be able to look at as a model, or what are some lessons learned? And so it's a big part of what we do at the Climate Collaborative. And then we're also all about this. We're also all about providing these kind of trainings and opportunities for dialogue, really looking for the ability to bridge conversations between, elected officials to staff, to all the way down to community members, between scientists, between stakeholders, between public health officials, natural resource managers. So we want everybody has to be at the table in order to really address climate change. We realize this is a very holistic, it's a very collaborative effort. So the Climate Collaborative is really based in this kind of grassroots community fabric woven strategy. And then the last mission that we have is making San Diego visible outside of San Diego. So we are at the bottom of the state. It's often hard to get noticed in Sacramento or the federal level. So a lot of what the Climate Collaborative does was help take all the great work that's going on here in San Diego, really showcase that through conferences, through going to Sacramento, through talking with funders outside and hoping to bring in more resources and more expertise into our area to really support the efforts that you guys are doing. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got started with working with sea level rise and coastal resilience is what I'll call it, is really like how to prepare our coast for these hazards and climate change impacts going forward. And you may not know this, but there are a ton of projects happening in San Diego, and I want to thank the Coastal Commission staff that are here for really helping to kickstart some of this work by providing state funding to a number of our cities that are now working on these local coastal program updates, which are essentially planning tools for helping to incorporate sea level rise information into our local planning documents. So that's a list of the grants that are that have been going on since 2014. Some of the most recent that were awarded: Oceanside and Imperial Beach. The California Energy Commission also awarded funding to ICF Consulting to work with SDG&E to look at sea level rise, vulnerability of natural gas and electricity infrastructure. And Brian D'Agostino is going to talk a little bit about that project. Other state funding that we received in the area for things like what we call living shorelines projects. So these are how can we use our natural coastal resources that we have, our landscapes that we have, is also a way to potentially buffer increased flooding or storm surges. So looking at our dune systems, looking at our wetland and marsh systems, and figuring out whether they can help us provide some buffer for our communities and for our infrastructure. So a pilot project going on is the Cardiff Beach Dunes Project. City of Encinitas staff are here. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but they're here to answer questions, I'm sure, as well as Brian Leslie from Moffitt & Nichol, who's one of their lead consultants on that project. So other initiatives, the San Diego Foundation has also thrown in money at the table. They started with a regional San Diego-based sea level rise strategy quite some time ago that really was one of the first in California, if not the nation, to really look at a regional project and understanding sea level rise. They're also funding some vulnerability work in those 3 cities. And then we have a number of different agencies that have taken their own initiatives, maybe at project scale, maybe at larger scale, including the Navy. There's been some research there. The Tijuana River Estuary, Danny can talk to you a lot about. They did a really great project looking at the whole river valley, essentially, in different sea level rise and climate change scenarios for this whole river valley. And then finally, the Climate Collaborative took a lot of this work that was going on. We started creating a regional dialogue with some of these folks to really start talking about how to connect these and bringing them together. And with that group, we pulled together a grant proposal to NOAA in 2015. And we were super excited to actually be the only California award that they ended up providing in that funding, almost $700,000 to really support our region and its coastal resilience efforts. So, as I mentioned before, there's roughly 14 plus projects that are really looking at sea level rise, and this is at a larger scale. I'm sure there's even some more, some additional kind of site-specific projects as well. And then I also wanted to point this out, so I'll provide this link at the end. So this is our Resilient Coastlines website. And the Climate Science Alliance, one of our partners, their GIS staff created this for us. So this is actually live for you guys to look at. And you can click on each of the different agencies and kind of find a little bit more about the specific coastal resilience and sea level rise efforts that they're doing. So a little bit more about the NOAA grant, because I know we got a lot of questions about, what's happening in the region and how do we look at all these different angles of sea level rise impacts. So as I mentioned, we have this regional working group where we're starting to talk about regional consistency, and it's been really helpful for us in terms of digesting the science. So with the help of USGS, we get together, we really talk about these projections, where they're incorporated into planning. We brought the Coastal Commission staff to come down and talk about sea level rise guidance. So we're going to continue this working group, and it's really designed to help people kind of move through the process and continue to build on our knowledge and expertise down here. We're also trying to find ways to continue to bring local scientists and relevant science to the table. A part of this grant is also looking at economic and legal components of sea level rise. So I hope to have some of that work available in spring of 2017. But they're looking at the cost benefits of certain adaptation strategies, using kind of a pilot with the Carlsbad strategies that the city is taking on right now, and really kind of diving all the way down into the weeds of like, when do you need to act, and is it more or less costly to act in the next 5 years or 10 years on some of these strategies? What about if we don't take any action? Is there a cost there, or is there legal liability with that? So we hope that those should bring some really interesting tidbits for us to work with in the region. And then also helping with outreach, and then also looking at living shorelines, which I mentioned before, sort of these natural landscapes that are designed to help with adapting to both sea level rise and storm surge and climate impacts. So there's a little bit more detail. I'm going to kind of skip through a little bit. So we talked a little bit about this already, and I did want to just bring it up once more because it came up so many times in a lot of your questions. What's the best science? So I think you heard there are a number of different science and modeling inputs, and there isn't necessarily one that has the gold star. The idea is that we have the opportunity to sort of mix and mold and also evolve, right? So we're never going to be perfect at forecasting. Watch your Weather Channel. You'll know that they're never 100% of the time perfect either, but we're getting better at kind of understanding all the different things that we might want to take a look at in terms of risks. So we brought up the NRC report, which is what the Coastal Commission Sea Level Rise Guidance is based on. And then we talked today about the Cosmos 3.0. I wanted to also bring up, this is part of what's called the California Fourth Assessment. So again, this is research. It hasn't been plugged in the way that USGS is kind of using this Cosmos and really giving us this kind of, sea level rise scenarios to work with. But I wanted to bring it up because it is important in the sense that these results are coming out. And basically, this is Dan Cahan and his team. And what they did was start to really look at what the contribution of ice sheet melting would be to sea level rise, because we're starting to get more and more data on that the ice sheets are melting faster in Antarctica. And so they wanted to know, are the sea level rise projections that we're using, the NRC report, are these still valid if we assume that the ice sheets might actually be melting faster than we thought? And so basically what you're looking at, okay. So here's the NRC, which is this red line right here. So you've got this 2050 right here, and this shows the ranges of sea level rise projections. So we're pretty close here. We're kind of, this is the NRC report. This is kind of the projections that they came up with. But after 2050, if we assume that the ice sheets are melting a lot faster, we're going to actually see a fairly drastic rise where we may potentially have significant sea level rise that's above and beyond what we're projecting right now. So again, this is not something that we're quite ready for taking into consideration in planning. The state is really looking at this research and trying to figure out if this will influence any of the state's guidelines in terms of planning. But something that if you're thinking more long term, some of you may just be planning to 2050, is that's your planning horizons, and that's great. But if you're thinking, again, like I mentioned, this sort of super duper risk, what's the highest exposure, and going beyond 2050 and really thinking out to 2100, this is some research that we might need to really put on the table. Hopefully I'm looking back at some of my scripts, folks. I accurately represented that. So just quickly going back, other available science, we have a lot of local research and information. So, other information might be we were talking about validating, there was a lot of monitoring that went on with the recent El Nino and the king tide, sort of showing that we've already hit some record tide levels, and we can sort of see what the flooding impacts of those are. We have, as we mentioned, a lot of beach monitoring going on, bluff erosion surveys, local research on estuaries and wetlands. So we have resources in the San Diego region, and we will be using and should be using them as much as we can to sort of ground truth and validate what we have at the table. So adaptation strategies, they generally fall in kind of these categories: protect, accommodate, relocate, or retreat. So I just wanted to talk about, and the panelists today are really brought here to kind of give you their personal insight into how it is that you take science that we talked about and that uncertainty and how you move forward, because we can't just sit here and wait for the seas to rise, and we can't wait for the science to be perfect. We have to decide to act now. So example of what we talked about in trigger approaches, this is just an example, but this is what some of the agencies are really starting to look at. Like, okay, at what point do we need to maybe change our strategies, and what sort of policies might we need to do? So building code revisions, does that mean that we start elevating our bridges or elevating some of our buildings? Do we start adapting a hazard zone? So we start notifying those businesses or community members that are in this area that you're in a hazard zone and that something may have to happen down the road. Are we looking at deed restrictions then further down because we actually need to move them back or to modify those properties and parcels? And then we're potentially looking at retreat. So then we're either figuring out ways to fiscally compensate for moving businesses or residents off of those parcels that we know are vulnerable. So, and this may happen over a specific time horizon based on, again, the risk and exposure that your community comes together and decides is the reasonable risk and exposure for those assets. And then we have things, as I mentioned, like these living shorelines, so really trying to invest now into piloting how some of our natural ecosystems can also buffer some of these impacts. So the top is an example from the Bay Area, but we're also looking at this in San Diego Bay about restoring oyster habitat as a way to sort of buffer some of, generally more protected bays, but as a way to sort of buffer some of the wave and storm surge onto some of the bay habitat. And then the bottom is a picture of a potential, that's a fake picture, artificially created picture. It's actually Cardiff, and this is the Cardiff Dunes project and what it might look like if they finish this dune project as a way to sort of buffer impacts to 101 there. So I'll wrap that up with, I am absolutely available to answer questions. If you want more information about what's happening in the community, please use the Climate Collaborative as a resource hub for me to help connect you. We do have a website around this NOAA Grant project called resilientcoastlines.org, and I will be posting the presentations and hopefully a recorded video, if it all works, from this workshop so that you can share with others. Did I make my time okay? Okay. All right, and there's my email. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and, we're going to start with Bruce. So Bruce, Dr. Bruce Becker.